Welcome back to this special edition of Talking Europe. Well, in the first half, we got the views from both the President of the European Commission and also the Parliament as to the future of the bloc. We're going to continue looking at that in this show, wondering whether the EU needs to be more integrationist. Does it need to focus more on its economy, give power back to national parliaments? What is the best way forward to form a solid future for an EU of 27? Welcome to the show, Mr. Manfred Weber. You're the leader of the largest party in the European Parliament, the European People's Party. Also, we have joining us Maria Rodriguez. You're Vice President of the Socialists and Democrats in the European Parliament, also working, I believe, on this EU 27 wish list of how that wants to be formed in the future. Also, we have Mairead McGuinness, Vice President of the European Parliament, also with the European People's Party. And last but very much not least, Mr. Philippe de Backer. You were an MP with the ALDU, the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats, until very recently, I believe April or May, when you took a position for the Belgian government, Secretary of State now for social fraud, privacy and the North Sea. Very warm welcome. We have just under 17 minutes to figure out the future of the EU. Mr. Manfred Weber, I'll perhaps start with you. We have heard some people say that less is more when it comes to the EU, that maybe perhaps at 27 we can be more solid and advance quicker.
Well, the question is does it really make sense to talk about less or more Europe? The question is, we need a Europe that serves, that delivers. A better Europe, that would be my wording for the future of European Union. When you, for example, have a look on the polls where people expect more Europe, then you see that, for example, in the fight against criminals, in the fight against terror, everybody is saying, please do your job on European level. We need an exchange of data, for example. And in other fields, bureaucracy,
there's a lot of focus
so
on
much.
Security, but in a lot of other fields, there's absolutely no solidarity, no unity in the EU. Ms. Rodriguez, you're working on that plan, roadmap for the 27 countries. What for you are the main issues and where is the EU likely to fail?
Well, we had a very important discussion inside the European Parliament and we could adopt a strategic resolution on the roadmap after the Brexit decision. And I should say that at the top of this resolution, we have put better working and living conditions for European citizens. The starting point of our resolution was about European citizens. They need to make sure that Europe is providing a new kind of protection for them.
Well, Europe has to be about people, and it has to show itself able to respond to the challenges that Manfred has spoken about, that you have talked about. But can I just pull you back a little? I'm worried that we're beginning to be obsessed about Europe after Brexit, so the 27. Let's talk about Europe today, 28. And until we see a triggering of this mechanism and a process begin, I think we have to work on today's challenges now, because so much of the conversation in Europe, and indeed on media, is about the future, a big, bold future. A lot of people, and I had citizens from Ireland in the Parliament today, are talking about today's problems, about concerns about youth unemployment, whether it's farmers worried about, you know, what price they get from the marketplace, as Manfred had said, about security and fear. So I think what we need to do as representatives is to listen very carefully to what people are talking about, not promise things that we cannot deliver on, but talk about where Europe has delivered, you know, on equality issues for women, on the environment,
on solidarity, the refugee crisis.
On solidarity, we failed a great deal, and in fact the word solidarity needs to be put up in capital letters again for all of us, all of the member states to address. And the funny thing about solidarity is we need perhaps to talk to our citizens back home, and I need to do that in Ireland as well, to talk about what it means to show solidarity.
Mr. de Backer, having taken that step out of the European Parliament, now with a national government, you know, do you think that that's possible, or do you think there is still this distance between what happens in the European Parliament and what people need to bring back to their national
I think there's one thing that citizens really understand. For common challenges and common problems, you need common solutions. And I think that every time we talk about these pressing issues, and I think nobody can be against more jobs, more economic growth, better security. The question is, how do you deliver? And the question there, I think, will be if you want to do a new Europe, and I think everybody is convinced that Europe needs to be reformed, both the European institutions and the member states will have to take the responsibility. And the question is, what Europe can deliver? What's the role of the European institutions? And of course, in the end, how can the citizens benefit from a more integrated Europe than today?
But perhaps, indeed, let's not even look at the after the UK leaves, but look at why we got there. I mean, we had a member state opting out because a lot of its citizens feel Europe doesn't work.
But frankly speaking, sorry, we have a situation in London, in Paris, in Brussels, all over Europe, that the media, the communication politically is occupied by national politicians. So in London, when we have now the Brexit, it is due to the situations that David Cameron made his whole career in Great Britain only in Brussels bashings, in accusing and attacking Brussels for mistakes.
Using Brussels
and then
as an
3
easy way
months
out.
before the referendum, he came back and said to citizens, now Brussels is so beautiful, Europe is so
Do we
beautiful.
not then need a more
we have to do that."
integrated
And that's
European
why,
Union?
that's why he's extremely right. We have to take over responsibility. National politicians
how do we do that?
who say in Brussels yes to legislation, to decisions, have to go back home and have to explain people why are they in favor.
Ms. Rodriguez,
Yes, but-
will they do that? I mean, how do we get that? Is it more integrated Europe? Do we need to give more power to Brussels then?
I will not put things like that. In fact, what we need is better European solutions. But we are dealing now with a very misleading message, is to say, well, we need to protect people by going back to national borders and national
Indeed.
solutions.
A lot of countries
And we
want
see
this.
this kind of message a bit everywhere in several countries. And let me tell you, this is completely misleading. Because national
challenge is-
level matters a lot,
Yeah.
but we need to have much more European
But
cooperation.
the challenges
and
are real.
solidarity.
The challenges are real. The challenges of unemployment, climate change, security, migration are real. And I think there you clearly see that today the European model is broken in a sense that we always relied on the member states to act on and trying to show solidarity together. This hasn't been no longer the case. They have not found a solution until
look
after
at
2 or 3
refugees.
years
But
to
you
fight
were-
a
you
refugee
used-
crisis. They have not found a clear solution. It took 2, 3, 4 years before we created banking union. These are steps and important steps forward. So Europe is still moving in the right direction, but it takes too much time in an ever-changing world. So what we need to do is clearly also engage the member states much more to see and to show them what is the benefit of cooperation. And this is something that I try to do from the national government now, to say, okay, my portfolio is social dumping. If you want to tackle social dumping, look at Europe for a solution. Let's try to build something together there and not refine ourselves just in national
McGuinness,
solutions.
briefly before we
Yeah,
go
I mean,
back.
I think you're absolutely right about responsibility, that we all as politicians have to take responsibility for decisions and votes that we take. And I think the council and indeed ministers need to take that responsibility. But I do think we need to acknowledge and reflect on a mood that is in society today, perhaps based on anxiety and fears, some well-founded and others not well-founded, that are not being addressed. And a fear which is now driving people, as you say, back to their own borders, believing that if we stay at home, we can protect ourselves, when quite frankly, in a globalized world, we cannot do that, that Europe needs to work effectively together. And perhaps, referring to my earlier remark, that the Brexit decision, which is quite a shock for the European Union, is also an opportunity for us to start valuing what is there already, change what's not working, and build on the strengths of member states that can work effectively together. It's not
How
about
do we
more
do that, though?
integration. It's about people taking responsibility for the problems that are there and coming forward with solutions collectively and going back
But
to
when we look
citizens
at
and explaining it, because I think that doesn't happen.
Because
enough.
when we look at that, we even heard Angela Merkel after the Bratislava summit saying the majority of decisions, which is in accordance with the Lisbon Treaty, that they don't work anymore because we've seen the proof of it. Hungary signed up to the relocation of refugees and didn't follow it.
That is again a question of responsibility. When we have a legal base, Lisbon Treaty, where everybody agreed on, then we have to implement, we have to
But
respect this.
The
And that
heads of
is,
state of the council are saying we have to find another way.
well, on a lot of fields it works still. So we have in the refugee thing, we have in a few things really problems in implementation, but in a lot of fields we have still a good working European Union, and which is guarantee fairness. But let me add one element on the Brexit thing. Probably we have to tell the people again what we are talking all about when we talk about European Union, because we see today Brits are asking for Brexit. Theresa May is saying all the day Brexit means Brexit. And I say, okay, then you cannot ask for a full involvement of the single market, for example, because it is today, that is today the fundament of the European Union. 2/3 of the whole legislation in the European Union is single market for the moment. And if you want to leave the European Union, you are leaving the single market. We have to tell people the truth. Europe is not Brussels. Europe is not bureaucrats. Europe is single market. Europe is Schengen. Europe is a fight against terror.
27, how
I would like to say what are real, concrete solutions at European level. A stronger investment plan, a real asylum system, a real European banking union and Eurozone working for convergence. This is missing. And if you see the decision of Bratislava summit, I'm disappointed with these conclusions because they don't speak about this. Refugees are ignored. There is no real commitment on investment. There is no real commitment on the Eurozone. So I hope that with this position taken by the Parliament, the European Council will move for a better roadmap for the European Union.
Can I just make a small point? I sometimes wonder, in a world that's overwhelmed with so many problems, that I often think that the space for leaders, and indeed sometimes for ourselves, to actually analyse and come up with good policy solutions is now much narrower. And therefore the pressure from people to address all of those challenges is much deeper, which means we do have to work more effectively together. And while you say you might be disappointed with the outcome of the Bratislava proceedings, on the other hand, and I think Manfred is absolutely right in saying this, we tend to dismiss where Europe works. We take it as a given. We only deal with where it's failing to operate effectively. And that has, in my view, led to a lot of discontent amongst our citizens, because if you only hear negative things, and that's true of the United Kingdom, why would you ever support the European Union? But I say to people, okay, let it fall apart. What do we have? We have ruins. And we have member states that have no facility to work together. Why would we do that? Why would we even contemplate such a future?
Mr. Belka, at the same time, we have such major divisions between various member states of this European Union. I know Guy Verhofstadt, the former Belgian Prime Minister, he's often voiced the opinion of having various levels within the European Union. Has the time come for that?
I think so, yes. I think that we need to take a step forward, but at the same time look at how we can use these powers better. I mean, if you're talking about security, migration, then I think it's clear that Europe needs to defend its borders, that you need a European solution, but then also put the competence and the money in the hands of the European Commission to implement and deliver. Because now nobody in the end is responsible. The European budget is fixed, the money cannot be drawn out. It's the member states who need to do it. In the end, after 2-3 years of discussions, we've come up with this European Coast Guard. They're not funded, so put the responsibility then also where it is. And I think this clarifies the situation, makes it much more transparent, and stops the blame game. Because in the end, if the situation is not bettered and not implemented, then the member states say, but Europe is not moving. And the European Union and institutions say, but it's the member states who need to do it. And this we have to stop. So the only way to stop it is to have a clear, transparent way of who is responsible in the end. So I think for migration, when it comes to security, when it comes to foreign policy, when it comes to single market, the European Commission should be responsible just as it is, for example, in trade. That's the only way that we're going to move forward.
I share this totally. So clear agenda, clear implementation, and afterwards responsibility. But another aspect is important. We are sometimes in the trap to only talk technically about the European Union. And
okay, that's the PR side of things.
That is extremely important. You know, the founders of the European Union had a dream, they had an idea, they had the idea of peace. And that was so fascinating, such a strong motivation to go in this direction. That was the foundation of the European Union. Today, I think we have to invest in the young generation.
We need to focus more on the economy, less on austerity, more on creating jobs. Indeed, a lot of finger pointing to Germany saying we don't need this surplus in budgets. We need to spend.
Everybody has to contribute. Those who have too high deficit have to reduce deficit, and those who have a surplus have to invest. So everybody has to contribute, but we should not finger point. We have to do it now. We have to do it now. That means also about responsibility.
That's the frustration of so many EU citizens. It takes so long to get words into
It takes the responsibility
actions.
of all the actors. It's not the European Commission or the Parliament or the national member states. We're all falling short. So the question is then, again, in this new transparent setup of the European Union, can we deliver better the policies that we basically
Everybody agrees.
The problem is a division, is it not, then, between the Parliament and the Commission and the Council of Europe? That's where...
I mean, we're different
Council.
institutions.
But
It's
that's
not
where it
there,
falls apart.
there are divisions. I mean, our work is different, but we work collectively and we try and come forward with compromise. But I think, Manfred, you struck a point there which, if you reflect on the mood, that's not just in Europe but across the Atlantic as well, this idea of appealing to people's emotions. And I do think we've lost touch with people, how they are feeling. And I would have thought that if we could get people to understand the importance of cooperation with your neighbour, we know it in Ireland because we're small, the need for that collaboration, but not just because you have to or because it's good for you or because there's this amount of money attached to it, but because it's much deeper. It's about the peace that I would like my children and their children to experience. It's about our futures. And it's really, really serious, whereas today we're talking perhaps too technically about Europe.
But at the same time, Ms. McGuinness, we can't avoid the failures as well. And I mean, we've seen just the most heartbreaking pictures for the last 2 years of tens of hundreds of thousands of refugees come into the EU with no solution. We had another summit last weekend in Austria. The focus of the refugee summit once again on borders, once again on people, keeping people out.
I was in Sicily on Monday and I visited a refugee camp, and there are over 3,500 people waiting to find homes.
Waiting for
and I'm
the EU
afraid
to
that
come up with solutions.
not the EU, I'm afraid that the member states have got to honour their commitments.
And I have to say, I'm from Germany. You know that my country is dealing a lot with the refugee. We have an internal battle inside of the party and inside of the society to talk about refugees. But nobody in Germany would say we have a conflict and that's why Germany is failing. But in Europe, when you have a problem, when we have a public debate about solving problems, everybody is saying immediately Europe fails if we are not solving this question.
The solidarity on this particular issue is failing. We not need a system of punishment, of sanctions on if you're part of the group, aren't you part of the group?
But you couldn't impose solidarity. It has to come from the bottom. It has to come from the heart. And I think maybe in the worst of crisis, Europe has actually responded, and perhaps we will equally respond, and that this talk about the future is not quite so gloomy as it is perhaps.
I'm really optimistic about the future. We have a lot of young people, dynamic people. We see a lot of innovation. We see a lot of new things coming up. If we can get our act together, member states and European institutions, I'm very optimistic about still the most wealthy continent in the world. Everybody wants to live here.
And we're leaders in so many things.
If we accept the or even already as a success which we have already
but we need to find a way
is to sell it to people that we already had a lot of success. If we do this and we create a little bit of optimism, not only with skepticism, then
we are sadly out of time. But I'm still wondering where we're going to find this magic bullet to get people to follow through on the decisions made on a European level. But thanks indeed to all my guests for having joined us to look briefly there at the future of Europe. As you can see, a lot of questions remain. Thanks also, of course, to you at home for having joined. And thanks indeed to Officio and the beautiful Solvay Library for having hosted us on this special edition of Talking Europe.